good? All right, good. All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Finley, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Desert Caballeros Western Museum. And first and foremost, happy holidays to everybody. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, happy Hanukkah. It is a great time of year. The spirit, I hope, is infecting all of you. I hope you're doing a lot of great Christmas shopping. I hope you're doing it in Wickenburg. And I certainly hope you're coming to ranch dressing and doing some Christmas shopping. We appreciate that very much. We have another excellent lecture for you today, lecture presentation. But before we do that, a couple of commercials. The first is next Tuesday, and looking at Emily, next Tuesday, 11 o'clock, we have a fan favorite here coming to give a presentation, and that is Bob Bosbell. Bob Bosbell is the publisher of True West magazine, an amazing friend of this museum, very supportive of Wickenburg, and he and another lady by the name of Jenna Bommersbach have written a book called Hellraisers and Trailblazers. It's a book about the wild women of the West. So it will be a wonderful presentation. If you've seen Bob before, he's practically a stand-up comic. So you will enjoy Bob. Second commercial, I'd like to have Kathy Clark come on up and talk about membership.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone here. Can I see a raise of hands who are members? Oh my goodness, I love it. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your membership. And if there are some that are not members, your admission fee today can go towards membership, and I can help you out. I have a table back there. But also, this time of year, we have our annual appeal campaign for year-end giving. So, if you would like to donate beyond your membership dues, that continues to support the programs and events and exhibitions that we have here. And I can help you with that as well in the back. And if you have any questions, please feel free to come see me, or you can call anytime. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Kathy. The Museum Board of Trustees earlier this year adopted a very important new strategic direction for us, and that is while we have done a wonderful job over the years of telling the stories of the cowboys of the West, they realize that there's a lot more history in the American West than just cowboys. And to that end, we have been doing exhibitions, especially in this very facility, to tell more stories, more cultures about the American West. We have told stories about the Navajo and their weavings. We have told stories about the Apaches in this area. And just recently, we installed this exhibition called Artesanía del Pueblo, which is, in fact, the celebration of the folk art of Mexico. Because, of course, Mexicans have a big part of the history of this region. So we want to educate and celebrate that culture. So to that end, we want to have a presentation by our very own Dr. Eduardo Pagan, professor of history at Arizona State University, but far more importantly, our adjunct curator of history here at the Desert Caballeros Western Museum. And he is going to give all of you a great presentation today about the Virgin of Guadalupe, which is a great story of faith and love in this area, this region of the continent, and certainly an appropriate story to tell here at Christmas time. So without further ado, Dr. Eduardo Pagan.
Thank you. So in addition to Merry Christmas, Bon Natale, Feliz Navidad, and here's one that, let's see if anyone knows this one, Kala Cristo Llena. Does anyone recognize this one? Yeah?
June White.
Kala Cristo Llena. You recognize it? Come on. Dad, yes, it's Greek. Thank you. Yes, Merry Christmas in Greek, right? So, there you go. All right, so as we talk about the Virgin of Guadalupe, I want to just call your attention over here to this image. And as we celebrate at the museum the folk art of the people of Mexico and of Latin America as well, this is not just a Mexican image. There is none in my mind that is more significant than this one here. So what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about the history. Let me give you a little theoretical lens by which to understand its significance. My approach is both one as a cultural historian, which draws from anthropology, but also as one who respects very deeply the innate spirituality of the human soul. And so we will try and approach it from multiple perspectives. There's another Virgin Mary, by the way, the next bay over. Again, this is probably, I shouldn't say probably, it is the most significant image and artwork, certainly in Mexico. She is the patron of Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe. So let us go on with this. So let me give you a little theoretical lens by which then to understand this image, this symbol. I want to talk about religious syncretism. I'll give you some quick examples. We all live with it, which I find so fascinating, again, as a cultural historian. We all live with religious syncretism, even if you're not a religious person. I'll give you examples, you'll see exactly what I mean. Then I'll tell you the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe. And then we'll talk a little bit about its enduring significance to people here in the American Southwest by taking a look at some modern artistic reconsiderations of it. And then I'll finish up with some takeaways from today's presentation. So, religious syncretism. There are many examples from Europe, United States, from Latin America as well. This particular image that I have on the screen is an image of a native warrior stretched out. You'll notice the stigmata, the signs in the hand stretched out in the symbol of the cross. You'll see the crosses there as well, peace pipes crossing also. But this is all native imagery. So clearly you can make out that this is a reinterpretation of Christian symbolism, the crucifixion of Christ, but from a native lens, right? Now we could go into greater detail about the crosses. They don't mean the same thing in the native world, but nonetheless, this is one example of this syncretism, the synchronizing of different belief systems and symbols as well. Now, let me give you some modern examples that we live with. As I said, it doesn't matter whether you're religious or not, we still have them. So, the term syncretism means the effort to find common worship ground through similar concepts, beliefs, and practices. And this syncretism can be imposed from outside. In other words, conquerors come in and this is the new religion, this is the way we're going to worship. It can be embraced from the inside as well. It happens in many ways. Here are some current examples. Our major national holidays in the United States. So we will begin with Easter. Let me ask this question. Have you ever wondered what bunnies and eggs have to do with the resurrection of Christ? The answer is nothing. But on a symbolic level, let me tell you a little bit about this. Easter Moneth, this is an Anglo-Saxon goddess. And Easter Month, as you can kind of make this out, Easter month is the month that celebrated the goddess Easter. She's associated with the dawn, so it's the beginning of the day, it's the beginning of things that are new. She was celebrated in the spring, and rabbits and eggs were used as symbols of fertility. Now let me pause for just a moment. The world over, particularly in the colder climates, humans built into their cultural lives, their symbolic lives, a recognition in the dead of winter that life will return again. The sun will return again. The spring will return again. This is one of the reasons why Germanic tribes chopped down evergreen trees and drug them into their homes to remind themselves that the spring will come again. This dark night of winter will not last forever, right? So many peoples of colder climates did this. And then celebrated the spring, again, to remind us that things will renew on this earth. There will always be a spring, new life. And so that notion of new life with the resurrection, you can see how that kind of comes together in this symbolic way. Even though, again, rabbits in themselves and eggs in themselves do not tie to the resurrection of Christ. But early Christian missionaries, as they came out with this message of Christ, sought to find ways with native beliefs that kind of said, it's like this, right? So your celebration of Easter Month, this celebration of the renewal of life, that is the beginning of understanding of what resurrection means. And so this is one of the ways in which they began to bring these different belief systems together. And what I find so fascinating now as a cultural historian, here we are in 2022, we're still doing Easter baskets, which have to have eggs, right? Some of us are doing egg rolls or hiding eggs around. At least, the whole notion of the Easter bunny, it's certainly part of our culture. We may not know the history, but we still live with this syncretistic, or this synchronizing of different belief systems, pagan belief systems of the renewal of life with the Christian message of the renewal of life, right? So we still live with that to this day. Christmas is another one that is layered with different traditions, at least Christmas as we celebrate it here in the United States. Certainly layered with Christian meaning, Roman meaning, Germanic, Scandinavian traditions as well. Sinterklaas, I'm sure many of you know where Santa Claus comes from, Sinterklaas. These are Nordic traditions. Let us back up, though. The biblical narrative of the birth of Jesus. Biblical scholars pretty much agree that the birth of Jesus happened sometime in the spring. Why? Does anyone know the answer to this? Shepherds were watching their flocks by night. This is something you do in the wintertime. You're watching your flocks because they're birthing, right? I mean, you're keeping an eye over your flocks as well. So how did then the birth of Christ, how did that get connected with December 25th? Well, here's what's really interesting. In the Roman world, and let me pause here and say this, if you ever have a chance to go to Rome, what is so interesting is, again, if you know something about European history, Christian history as well, that when Christianity began, it was this minor sect religion in the Roman Empire that eventually overtook the Roman Empire over time. And so it's interesting when you go to Rome, particularly in the Colosseum, there are now chapels that are established there. And symbolically, it is a way of representing that Christ is triumphant, right? Over this powerful pagan entity, civilization that at one time dominated the then known world. Christianity eventually was triumphant. So if you go to the site where the Colosseum was, you can see chapels there now. And there was a lot of this happening as Christianity was embraced around 400 AD by the Roman Empire. A lot of the pagan belief systems of the Roman Empire were pushed aside and then Christian symbols put on top of them, right? So you'll see them physically in many different ways. But also in the calendar, this is part of what happened. So let me tell you a little bit about Saturnalia. Saturnalia was the pagan Roman tradition of celebrating the winter solstice. Now the winter solstice doesn't happen on the 25th of December. It happens a little bit earlier, but it was actually Julius Caesar who placed it on the 25th of December. The celebration of Saturnalia was the birthday of the unconquered sun, S-U-N. But again, if you're familiar with Christian symbolism, you can see the connection between S-U-N and S-O-N, right? The unconquered sun. So as I said, Julius Caesar was one that established the official day of celebrating the solstice, Saturnalia, on the 25th of December. And here's what's interesting, is that the Roman houses decorated their homes with greenery and lights, and they gave presents to children and the poor, right? So that practice, again, how does that connect with the story of the birth of Christ? Some of us, we can trace it to the tradition of the Magi giving gifts to the Christ child, but it actually is much older in connection with that particular day. Now, so this is, as I said, as Christianity that became the dominant religion in the Roman Empire, that day was embraced not as Saturnalia, but this is now going to be a day in which we worship the birth of Christ. Now, I want to say this about Christmas. As we go forward in time, Christmas was not always a religious holiday. As a matter of fact, it was a very raucous holiday. There were many Christian denominations that refused to celebrate Christmas in terms of gift giving. Because, again, what does Santa Claus have to do with the birth of Christ, right? And in fact, it was a drinking tradition, which I find very interesting. And now I'm talking about during the Middle Ages. For a long time, the Puritans in the United States absolutely refused to celebrate Christmas. So Christmas was not celebrated in the United States really until about the 19th century, when it was kind of reinvented by a number of authors. But up until that time, you would go to Mass, Christ's Mass, you would celebrate the birth of Christ, but all the rest of this other stuff was pagan, right? And so there were a lot of denominations that refused to embrace these pagan practices. In fact, let me just say this. It's interesting, you're all familiar with the 12 days of Christmas. In the British calendar, this is what I find so interesting. Christmas celebration did not begin until midnight of the 24th. This is why you have midnight mass, right? That's when the celebration of the birth of Christ begins. It's a midnight mass. And that was the day in which you would then celebrate, you would bring things into the house to celebrate. And then the 12 days of Christmas was between that and the day of Epiphany, right? So that's the 12 days of Christmas. Now, we don't follow that here in the United States, but we still sing the song nonetheless. So to give you some understanding about what that song is singing about, this is really kind of the English tradition. I'll just share one other thing that I find interesting. So my wife's grandfather was an English immigrant, right? She grew up with the tradition of having oranges in her stocking. Why oranges? This is a British tradition. Why oranges? Because oranges were considered to be a luxury in England if you go back to the Middle Ages. And it's giving you an orange was something really quite precious because it was sweet and it was rare, and they had to grow in greenhouses, right? They don't have groves growing in the United Kingdom. It's too cold. But so again, this is a British tradition that has continued to this day. So my poor children get oranges in their stockings, even though here in Arizona we can get them anytime. But yes, it's part of that tradition. But anyway, it was a raucous drunken festival. It was a lot like Carnival, if you can think about that. It was around 336 when the Pope adopted the 25th of December as the celebration of Jesus' birth. And as I said before, even in Puritan England, it was banned. It was considered to be a Catholic invention. It was associated with too many things. There were lots of pranks that were played during Christmas as well. Let me see. Now, it wasn't until the 19th century, as I mentioned, that a number of authors began to kind of reinvent Christmas. Washington Irving, Charles Dickens. They emphasized family, children, kind-heartedness, gift-giving, Santa Claus / Father Christmas as well. And that's really how we get to our modern celebration of Christmas. But again, all of this is just to share with you that this is a very layered celebration that we are moving into now, that we're celebrating in some places after the end of Halloween, right? At least going by Home Depot, right? But here's some of the Germanic traditions that I find interesting. Again, it's this idea of bringing in this poor living tree into your house and keeping it there and lighting it. Why? Because, again, we're reminding ourselves that the sun will come back again. Lighting the tree, putting wreaths up, garlands as well, the Yule, some of you might still do Yule logs. Here's what I find interesting, though, is if you haven't had this dessert, this has now become kind of a Christmas tradition, is the Yule log dessert, which is this wonderful chocolate-layered ganache kind of thing. So that's all part of our celebrations now as Americans. It traces back to Yule, which again was this winter solstice celebration from Scandinavian countries. So this is, again, just to share with you, this is our season that we're in now, is this very layered season with different traditions that all work. That's the bottom line. So I find interesting is that nobody finds any of this hard to understand. We enjoy the Yule log, we enjoy the gift giving, we enjoy the Christmas trees, the wreaths, all the things that come with Christmas, and it all works in this very interesting way. And that's what I find so interesting. Halloween is another one. It comes from a Celtic celebration. Samhain, so depending on what part of, whether we're talking about Welsh pronunciation or Irish pronunciation, but Samhain is at least how I learned it. And it was an ancient Celtic ritual that marked the end of the harvest and then the beginning of a new year, right? And it was believed that during this time, at the end of the harvest, it was in particularly of that night is when souls of the departed would come back. And if you were good, you were rewarded. If you were bad, you weren't. And so there was a belief then that because the souls of the departed came back, you wanted to disguise yourself so that they wouldn't recognize you in case you've been bad. And so this whole notion of putting on masks and costumes and things like that come out of this. In fact, just what I find interesting is we're talking about Celtic cultures, the jack-o'-lantern, pumpkins are native to the Americas. They don't grow in Europe. The jack-o'-lantern actually was a turnip at one time. So think about that for just a moment. Trying to carve a turnip and putting a little candle in there. They must have had some pretty big turnips, but all of these traditions have lived with us as well. Again, this was another gift-giving celebration. Now we give out candy. And you all know this as well. What do kids say when they knock on your door, they ring your doorbell? Trick or treat. At one time, people actually would give tricks. People would do things. They wouldn't just give candy. Now, of course, you know, if you do a trick for someone, they'll egg your house, right? So now it's all kind of candy, but at one time, this celebration was that you could perform, you could sing a song, you could give some sort of trick, right, as a form of entertainment to the people who would come around your house. Now that's all changed, but now, 740 AD, this is when Pope Gregory III fixed the celebration of All Hallows Day. So every saint, if you're not familiar with the high liturgical calendar, every saint has their celebration day, their day of veneration. So All Hallows Day is a way of just making sure that we've included everybody, right? And so Pope Gregory III was the one that connected All Hallows Day with the 1st November, which then made October the 31st Hallows Eve, and over time it became Halloween, right? So that's how we came up with the tradition that we have now. It's this interesting combination, overlay, what else can we call it? Union of pagan belief systems with Christian theology, and it all comes together and works in this very interesting way. It just works in the minds of people as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about religious syncretism in Mexico and in Latin America. And the reason why I brought it out, this exhibition now focuses in on the folk art of Mexico, but the Virgin of Guadalupe is a symbol that goes far beyond Mexico, into the native communities of the American West and also into Latin America as well. It is a very powerful symbol and has great, great meaning. La Virgen de Guadalupe. So let me do this. Let me tell you a little bit about the story. There we go. Okay. So this is the story of how this all came about, and then I'll do a little kind of anthropological, symbolic analysis of this. So 1523, this is 2 years after the Spanish conquered the Aztec. Tenochtitlan was the capital of the Aztecs, and the Spanish in 1521, with the allies of the other enslaved native communities surrounding the Aztecs. So that's one thing I want you to understand, is the Aztecs were a dominant, vicious empire. They were dominant and vicious. I just want you to understand. They enslaved many other native communities. And as a part of their enslavement, required sacrifice to be sent to the capital, often in the form of people, right? Why? Because part of the Aztec belief system was that the heavens needed human blood to be able to continue going around, right? And so there were a lot of conquered native communities around the Aztec Empire that the Spanish, when they came in, they were smart enough to realize, you want to throw off your overlords? Join us. And they did, as a matter of fact. So the Spanish, when they came into Tenochtitlan, this is going a little turn in the weeds, but forgive me for just a moment. They did not want to destroy the capital city. It was so beautiful in terms of the architecture, the artistic attainment as well. But it was actually the allies, the native allies, that were so infuriated with this subjugation that that had been imposed upon them by the Aztecs. And when they came into Tenochtitlan, they sacked the place, completely destroyed it. Now, sorry, let's get out of the weeds, get back to the story. So, 1523, this is when the first Roman Catholic missionaries arrive, 2 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan. And the Franciscans, they immerse themselves in the study of indigenous language and culture, all for the purpose of understanding how do we then convey the message of Christ to these people who know nothing of this, right? And so they studied the Mexica, and this is what the Aztecs call themselves. We in English call them Aztecs, but they call themselves the Mexica, hence the name Mexico, right, from the Mexica people. So this is what they did, and as they did so, there we go. Once they're proficient in Nahuatl, which was the language of the Mexica, They began translating religious texts and began teaching Christian doctrines to the native people. And there was one convert in particular. His name was Juan Diego. That was his baptized name. Juan Diego, John James in English. He becomes very important to this story. Now, Juan Diego himself, this is an artistic representation. He was born Guadalupe, which in Nahuatl means eagle that talks. He was born in 1474. He was a historic individual. We have lots of information about his life. He lived in one of those outskirt communities that were conquered by the Aztecs, about 14 miles north of Mexico City, just to give you some idea. And they had been fairly recently conquered by the Aztecs. So, Juan Diego is an early convert to Christianity. So let me tell you a story about the apparition itself. So this is Tepeyac Hill. And this hill is very, very important. In fact, there's a little chapel up there. Now, on the 9th of December, 1531, so that is, my math is correct, 491 years tomorrow, right? 491 years ago. Again, if my math is correct. Tell me if I'm off. He was crossing this hill to attend Mass. He was very devout. And as he attended Mass on the 9th of December, he saw this blinding light and heard what was described as unearthly music, just this beautiful, beautiful sound. And what appeared to him was a beautiful, dark-skinned woman, that image that we have right there, calling him my son, and declared herself to be the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. In fact, the message goes even further when she said, "You are my son, and I am the mother of all those that live here." It was a very, very powerful statement, but let me explain that a little bit more in just a moment. So she told him that it was her desire to have a church built on that hill, and then she asked him to relay that message to the bishop that was in what is now Mexico City. So I want you to kind of understand this for just a moment. This is a humble neophyte, a new convert, of no status, no standing whatsoever. Even in the Aztec social hierarchy, he was pretty low, right? So just a working class guy. Now he's tasked with the Virgin of going to one of the most powerful figures in Mexico City, in Spain, in the Americas, and telling him, guess what? Mary has appeared, but she hasn't appeared to you, she's appeared to me, right? And she wants you to do something. That, you could have put yourself for a moment, that is a challenge. This is a representation of the bishop. And so there were actually 4 or 5 different apparitions as the story goes, where Juan Diego tried to talk to the bishop. He couldn't get an audience. He came back. Then Mary told him to try again. Anyway, I mean, so there are a number of visitations that happen, but finally Juan Diego gets audience from the bishop. And the bishop, of course, is like, who are you? What, you know, so he wants proof. And so Juan Diego is embarrassed that this mission that he was tasked to carry out, he failed. The bishop didn't listen to him, and so he avoided Tepeyac Hill on his way back home and his way to Mass as well. And the Virgin appeared to him again. And when he reported to her, I tried, the bishop wouldn't listen to me, he wants a sign. The Virgin then said to this, she instructed him to go up on that hill, which in its day, it's very lush now, in its day was described as being just this scrub hill of cacti and just basic kind of native flora, if you will. She instructed him to go up and pick roses which were growing there, which were not supposed to be growing there. So he went up the hill and he pulled off his cloak. It was a grass-made cloak. It was that native people wore, the tilma, if I remember correctly the term. Pulled it off and then gathered up the roses into his cloak and then carried them all the way to the bishop as a sign. So what happened then is that as he then stood before the bishop to open up to show the roses as a sign, this image was emblazoned on the cloak. This particular image that we have right here, this reproduction. And the bishop then ordered a small church constructed on the site. This is another artistic representation of that particular moment when he opens up his cloak, the roses come out, and there is that image on the cloak as well. this is an actual image of that tilma, of that cloak, which is now framed in this specially protected frame. It is kind of like our Constitution. If you ever go to Washington, D.C., it's behind this glass, and it's temperature controlled, humidity controlled, all these kinds of things. That's the cloak right there. And there have been tests made on this cloak over time. One of the things that are considered to be miraculous about this particular artifact is that it is not deteriorated in over 4 centuries, almost 5 centuries now. Despite having been handled many times. As a matter of fact, as the story goes, that the bishop took this mantle and had it in his private chapel for years. People came, they touched it, and so it didn't exist in this protected form for quite some time. It is still pristine. It is still whole, if you will. And that's considered to be one of the miracles of this particular one as well. There are many other miracles associated with this religious symbol itself. It's a long, long list of miracles associated with this, but I just want you to acknowledge that. Now, the Virgin then becomes a national symbol over time. Let me do this. This is a picture from the 1960s. Some of you may remember the UFW, United Farm Workers, great boycott in the mid-1960s. And here's what I want to point out. This significance is when they marched to boycott, and their boycott was really to try and raise wages for workers out in the fields, but also conditions. They marched under the banner of La Virgen de Guadalupe, right? And she becomes a very, very powerful symbol of a protector, right? So, but this is late in the game, the 1960s. In 1810, as New Spain broke away from Spain, this is now the revolution that gives birth to the Republic of Mexico in 1821, starts in 1810. It was actually inspired by Padre Miguel Hidalgo de Icostilla, and he gave a homily, which he called his parishioners to arms, and he finished his homily with basically saying, "Death to the Spaniards, long live the Virgin of Guadalupe." And so as they marched into battle in revolt against Spain for their independence, they marched under the banner of the Virgen de Guadalupe, right? And so her image for many Mexicans today is probably as significant to them as our stars and bars are to us as Americans, right? We see that symbol. That is our symbol of who we are as a people, as a nation. It's the stars and stripes, right? For Mexicans, I would argue it's not the Mexican flag, it's the Virgin of Guadalupe. That is the symbol of who they are as a people and who they are as a nation as well. When Zapata, in 1914, rose in opposition to then President Porfirio Diaz, who had been in office for 3 decades, is one of these situations where the Constitution was rewritten and rewritten and rewritten to allow the president to be reelected unanimously every time, right? At one point, the Mexican people revolted against this, and Zapata, many of you are familiar with, when he gathered an army together, they marched against Porfirio Diaz, again, under the banner of the Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe. And as I said, here's an image here of the 1960s as well. So let me share with you, why did she become such a powerful, powerful symbol? So here's what I find so fascinating as a cultural historian. It's really, to me, this is part of understanding the power of ideas and how certain ideas seem to transcend people, seem to transcend geography, seem to transcend time as well. Many people of this human race, many cultures have venerated the female, have venerated the mother, and have understood in many ways a divine veneration. The mother holds this very sacred place in our hearts and our memories and even belief systems. So you can trace this to Africa, you can trace this to Europe, you can trace this even among the native people here before the coming of the Spaniards. It was the veneration of the divine feminine. This is one of the things that I find very interesting. A constant throughout all of human history is a recognition of the importance of mothers and of women in particular. This image I want to share with you is Tonantzin. Now remember that before the Spaniards came, among the Aztec nation, they had their own very powerful belief system. Some of it, of course, included practices that we today would would revolt against, right? And for a very good reason. But part of their pantheon, part of their belief system, was Tonantzin was the mother goddess. She was the mother. She was the divine feminine. In fact, in Nahuatl, Tonantzin means our honored mother. There are other definitions given to the title of Tonantzin: Our Lady, Mother Earth, the bringer of maize, mother of corn, goddess of sustenance. Let me just pause here and just say very quickly, among many native communities, particularly in the Midwest, the American Midwest, corn is venerated as a very sacred symbol that came to us humans by way of the Divine Mother, right? In fact, there's an Osage account that I appreciate, and I will just do a quick divergence on this. Part of their accounts are that the people were starving, and they prayed day in and day out, have mercy on us, we're dying. And the mother, the Divine Mother, had pity on her children, so she came down in human form, and she had blonde hair, which is interesting. And this comes really important in just a moment. She had blonde hair. She gave her body as sacrifice, and she told the Osage, you know, I'm going to give my body as sacrifice, I want you to bury it. And out of it will grow a gift, and this will then feed you, right? And this is what they did. So she was sacrificed or sacrificed herself. She was buried. Out of it came stalks of corn. And as a symbol of the Divine Mother is corn silk, right? And so for many Midwestern community or native communities, corn silk is a symbol of the Divine Mother, the sacrifice she gave so that we can eat, right? People will have food. Let me pause here and say that many of you know that many native communities were hunter-gatherers, and for our hunters in the crowd, you know this, there are a lot of times, even fishermen, you could go out and you could go hunt and you won't find game at all. And it has nothing to do with your skills. Sometimes game, you just can't find them. Or sometimes you go fishing and you just don't catch anything. Again, it's not a testament of your skills. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. If that's the way you feed your family, there are times when your family will be hungry, right? And so corn, the ability to harvest corn is the ability to feed yourself. Your children don't have to starve anymore. And so that's why corn for many native communities is a sacred thing. It's a gift from the Divine Mother so that we, her children, no longer have to starve, right? So it's remembered in that way. So anyway, this is part of the reason why corn, particularly with the Navajos and the Apaches as well, some of you might remember the Apache exhibition that we had and the significance of corn pollen, particularly as young girls transition into womanhood. Corn pollen is very important. Yeah, so you see the connection of all of this that comes together. And this is Tonantzin. This is how the Aztecs understood this idea. Sometimes her title was Tonantzin Cuatlachopeo, Cuatlachopeo, the one who crushes the serpent. So for those of you who understand your Christian cosmology, your Christian theology, crushing the serpent is an important symbol, particularly coming out of the book of Revelation. And so that particular translation, you can understand why from a native perspective of the Aztecs, they would understand the Virgin as being like this, being like the Divine Mother that they had worshipped before. You see the connections. But here's what's even more interesting, is that Tepeyac Hill was the site of veneration for Tonantzin before the Spaniards came. And one of the things the Spaniards did, of course, in an effort to kind of rid the world of paganism, was that they destroyed the temples and the sites of worship as well. And so Tepeyac Hill was a former site of veneration to Tonantzin, the Divine Mother. And so for Mary to appear, the Virgin of Guadalupe, to appear on that hill is a very interesting synchronistic or syncretistic event, in my mind, as I look at this as well. Yeah, I mean, this is going a little too deep in the weeds, so let me just skip that. Now, a little bit of analysis about the significance. If you will take a look at this image right here, she is a dark-skinned virgin. You can't quite tell here, but many interpretations and analyses of this image, this one doesn't quite show it, but she looks pregnant in other ones, right? Not so much here, but so she's pregnant, she's with child. She's a dark-skinned woman. That's important because when the Spanish came to the Americas, these were the images of the Virgin they brought with them. These are middle-aged images of the Virgin, looking very much like a European woman, right? Light skin, light hair, light eyes as well. But the Virgen de Guadalupe is a native woman. And again, I remind you what she said to Juan Diego was that you are my son and all of the people here are my children. So from a symbolic perspective, this was the apparition of the mother deity, the mother of God, from the Catholic perspective, that was saying, you are acceptable to me, you native people. You are acceptable to me. I am your mother goddess. I watch over for you. I care for you as well. So hopefully you see how these belief systems that existed, Donancin with the Virgen de Guadalupe, comes together in this very interesting way. This particular site of Tepeyac Hill, in a way that continues this ancient understanding that I would posit that humans have had since time immemorial, that women are significant. Without women, the human race dies, right? The mother is significant. The feminine is significant. And the veneration of this, or the keeping this sacred, is significant. Now, granted, we can have a discussion how that is not always played out over time and place, but at least that understanding is a very, very ancient understanding in the human mind. Now, with that, let me kind of share with you some quick artistic variations of this. And this is not meant to be sacrilegious in any way. These are more modern representations by Mexican-American artists. The woman to the left is a jogger, which celebrates athleticism, female athleticism. The woman in the center, she's providing for her family. And the woman on the right, as you can tell, she is a venerated elder, right? So this is, again, a way of representing that the symbol is still powerful for many Native communities, for people who connect back to Mexico, the people who connect to Latin America. Again, it is a way of venerating the divine feminine and recognizing the importance of women in our lives, and celebrating that as well. So here's some takeaways. One, back to this concept of religious syncretism. It is a way of finding common ground between two very, very different systems. I'll share this story with you. That my mother, my mother's mother, so this is my maternal grandmother, she went to Mass every day of her life, devout. She was also a curandera. She was a healer. And the practice, I still remember as a child, I came down with chicken pox or something, I can't remember what. I still remember her doing various rites over me to heal me that were not Christian rites. They're certainly not Western medicine. They were native healing rites. But in her mind, it all worked, right? It all worked. There was no conflict in her mind. And this is what I find so interesting about the human experience, is that we find ways of recognizing and venerating that which is significant to us. And it really doesn't matter so much whether it comes from Spanish Catholicism or from native beliefs. We find ways of bringing this all together to continue celebrating what is deeply important to all of us, right? And so this is a way of finding common ground between different traditions. I wish, now as a child, and I think all of us, I wish that I could go back in time and ask her, how does this make sense in your mind? How do you square these two belief systems together? But she's long since passed. But anyway, but what's interesting though, what's interesting is that this syncretism can often produce a third way of worship and belief. So you have one system, let's take Roman Catholicism, you have another system, let's take the Aztec belief system, and the blending of the two can often create a third way of belief and a third way of practicing, which is not quite the same. I could go into more examples, but let's go on. So the story of the Virgen de Guadalupe to me speaks to the power of venerating the sacred feminine across many cultures. And it continues to be a very powerful image today. She is considered to be a divine protector. It's one of the reasons why you'll see her image in many places, among many Native communities, even tattooed on the body as a way of wearing that protection, right? And it may be one of the ways in which Native communities of the Americas reclaim that sacred power by finding ways to continue traditional beliefs. I think it's more than just circumventing and undermining the beliefs that were presented to them. Again, I think it speaks more to this ingenuity of the human soul, of finding ways to holding on to what is sacred and important to you, and recognizing that there are many expressions of it, right? The expression could be a European image of the Madonna. The expression could be a native image of the Virgen de Guadalupe. The expression could be Donancin as well. I mean, all of this points us in the same direction. And so this is how I, as a scholar, how I look at and study these symbols. Again, we've talked about the cross. The cross, yes, it can represent the Christian cross, representing the crucifixion of Jesus, but it can also represent, from a native perspective, pointing to the cardinal directions of the power of the divine forces, that there's nowhere you can go in this world, north, south, east, and west, that is outside of their loving protection, right? And so it takes that other meaning, which doesn't undermine the Christian cross, but it kind of adds to it as well, at least from my perspective. So with that, let me go ahead and take any questions, any comments. I skimmed very quickly over the story of Juan Diego, but again, I'm happy to entertain any comments or questions. So yes?
Did he ever see this chapel built, and if they did, is it still even exists?
Yes, so that chapel is built, and that picture is a modern picture. Juan Diego was canonized. He was the first native person of the Americas canonized and made into a saint. So, yeah, that building's still there. Yes, sir.
Where is the cake displayed?
It is in Mexico City in the, I should know the name of the cathedral. It is the main cathedral in Mexico City, behind the old. Yes.
Have you by any chance made a booklet or something,
No, I haven't. I'm sorry. I apologize. But I can send out the PowerPoint, though. I can certainly do that. So, Kathy, we'll see if we can take care of that. Yes, I got you. Go ahead.
Is this fact or fiction? I read or saw it online today, I'm not sure if this is true, that because of this, the Aztecs quit making sacrifices. They had pretty probably quit making sacrifices
Yeah.
hundreds of years before that, right? That's because they saw this, the Aztecs believed, and they quit making sacrifices because like 3,000 Aztecs were converted like in a really short period of time.
I will see. It's a very great question. So, the fall of Tenochtitlan, 1521, we were talking about that before. One of the accounts was that as the battle was going on over Tenochtitlan, between the Spaniards and their allied forces, the Aztecs were trying to protect their capital, there were Spaniards who were captured. And when the Spanish finally went into what is now Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, they found the remains of their colleagues who had been sacrificed to the Aztec deities. So even up until that point, they were still actively sacrificing humans. And I should add that they weren't alone. There were many Native American communities of the Americas as well that also did human sacrifice. So in my mind, I will just put it this way. If there's a belief system that comes along that says, guess what? You don't have to give up your uncle anymore, right? Would you rather do that instead? I think I would say, yeah, sign me up, right? And so, I mean, it was an oppressive system in terms of human sacrifice. There are lots of accounts, at least coming from the European observers, that this human sacrifices did not go willingly to that end. I mean, there are lots of discussions that the human sacrifice was an exercise of the power of the state. We are so powerful. We can take someone meaningful to you, we can sacrifice them, you can't do a thing about it. Kind of explains why so many of people who were allied with the Aztec Empire willingly overthrew them. That's one of the reasons, right? Is again, we don't have to do this anymore. And this was all part of that, was again, embracing this, I think I would say the gentler side of spirituality and observance. Okay, yes.
Could you speak a little bit about the more recent scientific investigations of the as to how it developed and maybe some of the hidden images,
You know,
reflected images in their eyes?
yeah, there is that, and I actually, as I study this, I mean, there is, and you can do this. You can find very deep analysis of the symbols all throughout the number of the points of the stars, the number of points on her crown. I mean, there's a lot of that, which I'm not so much interested in that personally. I tend to step back, and I tend to ask myself, why is this image such a powerful image, right? I mean, yes, there are studies you can find. There have been scientific studies trying to carbon date the cloak as well. Again, there is discussion that even in the image of her eyes, you can see reflected in it Juan Diego. Yes, there's all of that. And I can't do a decent job because I tend to take a larger look and I ask this larger question about why she's so powerful to so many people. And I think it comes back to that. I think it's our, I would argue, our collective innate understanding of the significance of women and of the mother in particular, and how, again, as I said before, none of us are here without our mothers. None of us. And I think at some level we all know this. It's one of the ways of recognizing that. That's how it, so I step back and ask that larger picture. But yes, again, just to acknowledge, you can find some very finely detailed studies of all of that, the color, the symbols, everything about this. Because, yeah.
Yeah, there's a part where you said you didn't want to get too deep into the weeds, so you skipped over it, and it's a comparison of these two.
Yeah.
And there was a real interesting name down at the bottom. in the
Yes.
language. Could you just
Yes. So there has been discussion in the study of this as well. There's been discussion about the origin of, let's see if I can get this up here. There we go. Of the origin of the name Guadalupe. Where does that come from? So there is some speculation. Let me get to that slide in particular. There. Oh, I think, oh, here we go. So there's some speculation, there you go, that it is actually a derivation, a Hispanicization of the native term Guadalupe, which means the one who crushes the serpent. Guadalupe comes from that. There's some speculation. As a matter of fact, though, what's interesting is that there is a site in Spain called Guadalupe. It traces back to the 1300s. There was an apparition of Mary in Guadalupe in the 1300s, has been venerated since then. And interestingly enough, she was one of the dark-skinned Madonnas. Some of you know about the Black Madonna tradition. The Virgin of Guadalupe de Extremadura, which was it's a place in Spain. She was known and venerated long before the Spaniards came to the Americas, right? And so the term itself, Guadalupe, comes from Wadi Alub, is an Arabic term for hidden river. Very, very quickly, again, this is getting deep into the woods. The Spanish peninsula was conquered by the Arabs and the Muslims up until 791, if I remember correctly. They conquered most of Spain. They renamed it El Andalus, which is why many Spanish towns in this day have Arabic names or derivations of Arabic names. And after 791 began what is known as the Reconquest, the Reconquista, which lasted for about 800 years and ended, interestingly enough, in 1492. And you all know the significance of this. And as the story goes, was the king and queen of Castile, recognizing the great significance of having reconquered the peninsula, finally said to this crazy Italian, fine, take 3 boats, leave us alone, and the rest is history, right? But again, it was a recognition of, finally Granada, which is the south of Spain, fell in 1492, and in gratitude it was like, all right, go your way, take 3 boats and leave us alone. So I don't know, yeah. I don't know ultimately whether Guadalupe is a derivation of a Nahuatl term or whether it actually comes from Spain. I'm not so interested in that, quite honestly. Some people really will wrestle you to the ground about whether it's Spanish or native, and it doesn't matter to me.
But
Yeah.
there was another apparition
Yes.
in the 1300s.
Yes, yeah, oh yes. In fact, there's a site you can go to in Guadalupe, which is actually quite significant in Spanish history. It's a significant site, yes. But she's one of the Black Madonnas of the Marian tradition. So, yeah, yes.
I'm curious about your grandmother's practices.
Yeah.
Did it work on you?
I'm healthy now, so you know.
Continuing today, is it recognized?
You know, yeah, so yes, the curandero practices continue this day. And in many Latino communities, you can find herberias, herb shops. Curanderos are essentially herbalists, at least in my mind, it's one way of thinking about it. Herbalists with an overlay of spirituality as well. And you can find them, and you can certainly find curanderos in this day. Healers who use traditions and practices that are definitely not Western, and they're definitely not Christian. They trace back to native belief systems and native practices as well. So, my mother and I would kind of laugh about it to this day. Is when if she comes down with something, I say, well, I'm going to do this to you. I mean, I guess, you know, rolling an egg over the body was considered to be very important. We could go into that as well, but it's the things I tease my mother with. I'll bring an egg and we'll do that. No, I'm not good at that also. Anyway, yeah, thank you for that. All right, any other questions before we call it a day? I see that Dan is standing up, so. All right, thank you for your attention. We'll see you. Thank you.